All right, fellas, guess what? There's no such thing as a best zero. Let me explain. Hey, what's up, fellas? Welcome back to the channel. Thanks for stopping by. Again, it's your host, Paul. So let me ask you guys a question. What zero do you use on your rifle? And how did you select that number? Was it because some random YouTuber like myself said, hey man, 23 yards is the best zero? Or maybe your favorite operator told you, no, you retards, 40 meters is the best combat zero because combat. Well, maybe there's a better way to do this. Instead of someone else passing you that information, how about taking into account several factors like, hey, what ammo do I use? What kind of muzzle velocity is coming out of the barrel? What kind of optic is on the weapon? What's my intended engagement distance? Kind of factor all those things in and find a zero that works for your gun. You know, every serious and skilled rifle shooter that I know share one thing in common. They want to know exactly where their bullet is going to hit at the ranges that they're shooting. So if you're equally serious and data-driven, then this video is for you. Because I'm going to kind of lay out my zeroing process, which you can also use for any combination of rifle and optic. And just so you'll get a wide example of different rifles being zeroed, I'm going to do it using 3 different rifles with 4 different optics. Starting with this one. This is 11.5 with the Mepro RDS Pro V2 and 3x magnifier. I'm also going to do it with an EOTech BDC model, the EXPS 3-4 with a primary arm 6x magnifier. And lastly, a 16-incher with a Vortex PST LPVO and a Hollison 507C on piggyback. So let's walk through the steps right now. Maximum effort. All right, fellas, so I've been shooting a long time. I'm kind of old now. So when I talk to a shooter, I find out they don't own a chronograph. It really surprises me because muzzle velocity is super important to ballistics and zeroing. So here I am using a really kind of basic one, the Competition Electronics Pro Chrono. They're not expensive and they last a long time. So there's really no reason for you not to have one. If you don't already have one, I'll leave some links below. Check them out so you can get hooked up. So that muzzle velocity is going to depend a lot on the ammo and your barrel length. Speaking of ammo, I think it's very important to zero with the most accurate ammo that you can find for your barrel. I know a lot of guys just go cheap and just find the cheapest 55 grain that you can find. That will work okay. But when you're talking like shooting at range and precision, in my experience, anything heavier than 55 grain generally works a little bit better, like 69s, 75s, 77s, you know, the good stuff. So of course, there's going to be a big difference in cost between the 55s and the good stuff. So that's one of the reasons why we kind of shoot dual ammo out of some of our rifles, in that anything within 200 yards, we'll shoot the cheap stuff. And anything requiring precision, we'll shoot the good stuff. So we'll switch between them. Okay, so now let's go to the actual chronoing procedure. We'll chrono with the different ammo we're using for all our different rifles. So just some quick instructions in case you're not familiar with how a chronograph works. For sunny days, you'll use the white plastic diffusers, and overcast days, it's best to leave them off. You'll want to set it 10 to 15 feet away to get the best results. Don't use them around sunrise or sunset, as the readings will be wrong or you just won't get a reading. Remember the height overbore offsets, so don't aim any higher than the diffusers. We want to get a good average for our chosen ammo, so I usually fire 7 rounds to get the average. It's best to get a reading for every barrel, even ones with the same length, as there can be slight differences between them. However, a suppressor makes very little difference, so feel free to use one. Once you've shot your 7 rounds, every press of the review button will cycle backwards through each shot until you get to the stats: the high, the low, the average, and the extreme spread. For every rifle and ammo combo, get an average. Okay, so now that we have our muzzle velocity averages, we'll take the next step and plug them in. All right, fellas, so you know in the olden days, in order to build out your dope card, you had to do that all manually. You had to group at various distances, write them all down, and that was your dope card. But now you don't really need to do that because we have ballistic calculator apps on our phones that can handle all that heavy lifting. There's a lot of good ballistic apps out there. I'm just going to talk about 2 that I know. They're pretty popular. One is Strelic and the other is Chairgun. Okay, for Strelic, some bad news. Due to the Ukraine sanctions, you cannot download this app anymore from the App Store, either for iOS or Android. But there are some workarounds. First, you need to go to the Strelic Ballistics user group on Facebook. From there, click the Featured tab. If you're an iOS user and already bought Strelic, you can use the iMazing app to reinstall it. Search this Facebook page for iMazing and follow the instructions on this post. However, note that the iOS version hasn't been updated in a long while, so you won't get any new reticles or product updates. Also, if you never bought Strelic, it won't be tied to your Apple ID, so you won't be able to install it. But if you're an Android user, you can install the app using the Huawei App Gallery. To install the App Gallery, so find the post by Randall Carey and follow his link. This page has instructions on how to install it. However, if you're in the US, the App Gallery is blocked due to US sanctions, so you have to use a VPN to install it. This version is updated regularly by the Strelic team, so the Android version is always the newest. Now, if you don't want to go through all that, there is another option and it's directly available for download in the App Store called Chairgun. I don't know if it's the same programming team because it's almost exactly the same as Strelic. Since both apps are so similar, I'll proceed with the next steps in Chairgun only. So the first thing you'll do is click on equipment at the bottom and change rifle to add your rifle. For every rifle and optic combo, you need to add one rifle to the list. For example, I have 3 different rifles, but actually 4 rifle combos since one rifle has an LPVO and a piggyback. Now click change rifle to select each of these and set up the scope screen. On this screen, you'll just leave the zero distance at 100 yards. The scope height is very important though, so you'll want to measure from the center of your optic to the center of the barrel. For AR-15s, it's 1.2 inches from the barrel to the top of the Picatinny rail. So if you bought a 1.5 inch scope mount, then your scope height would be 2.7 inches. For scope clicks, these will be populated once you select your scope reticle. So for red dots without BDCs like the Mepro RDS or our piggyback Holosun, just select the 2 MOA dot. It's just a placeholder to allow you to verify and change the vertical and horizontal clicks to match what your turrets say. For the Mepro RDS Pro V2, EOTech EXPS 3-4, and our Vortex PST 1-6 LPVO, it's 0.5 MOA per click. The only outlier we have today is our piggyback Holosun 507C, which is a pistol sight after all, so it's more coarse at 1 MOA per click. Once you add the optic, you'll want to add your other rifle and optic combos, so we'll add the other 3 now. When you add the scopes, just make sure the adjustment clicks are right because sometimes the database is wrong. You'll notice here the EOTech BDC shows 0.25 MOA. Instead, it should be 0.50 MOA. Now that we have our rifle and optic combos, we'll add the ammo types, i.e. cartridges, that we'll use for that combo. Chairgun has a large database of cartridges, especially if you get the paid version, so you can start from there and search and choose something that's close to your load. On the cartridges menu for standard 55, I usually choose XM193 since it has the right BC and other factors, and you can fine tune from there. The most important numbers here will be the BC, ballistic coefficient, and the bullet speed, i.e. muzzle velocity. The BC will get imported based on your cartridge selection. For bullet speed, plug in the muzzle velocity that you gathered earlier with the Chrono section. Since I'm shooting both the cheap stuff and the good stuff, the 60-inch rifles will have 2 cartridges, the 55 and the 69s. For the 11.5 with the Mepro, I'm only shooting the cheap stuff, so there will be only 1 cartridge configured for it. One last setup step that I like to do is change the ballistics table appearance. So click on the table icon in the top right corner, go to the gear icon, and the ballistic table settings. I like to start at 10 yards with a step distance of 5 yards to be really precise. On vertical corrections, I turn on inches, MOA, and MRAD. And for horizontal, I only turn on inches, although you can turn on MOA or MRAD if you're holding. Okay, that's it for the Chairgun setup. We'll go back to it again later, but it's good to go for right now. All right, fellas, so our ballistic calculator set up, and now we're going to move into the first part of zeroing, which is actually the rough zero. So for the rough zero, no matter the rifle or optic combo, I always start at the 25-yard line. That's because at the 25, I'm almost guaranteed to be on paper, which is what we're looking for. So just to be clear what we're trying to do with the rough zero, we're not grouping here. So what I'm trying to do is just land 1 shot into the target zone. Now that target zone will depend upon your height over bore because we're close right now. So if you have a standard like 2.7 inch height over bore, our target zone is 1.5 inches below the bullseye. For higher mounts like the piggyback, we want to land it about 2.5 inches below the bullseye. So I call it a target zone because it doesn't have to be precise. This is a rough zero. We are not grouping. Also, because we're at close range, just use your cheap ammo. In practice, usually it only takes me 2 to 3 rounds at most to get a rough zero, because once you have your first impact on paper, you know exactly how many inches you need to move over and down or up to get to the target zone. And as a reminder for your turrets, when you're turning them and the direction that's noted on the turret is you're moving your shot group, the point of impact. You're not moving your reticles. And also just remember, since we're at the 25-yard line, you have to do a little bit of math to figure out the MOA or mils per click. So for example, if you have a red dot that has 0.5 MOA per click, it's 8 clicks per inch at 25 yards. Now, if you need a little help with the math, there is a really good website called Kevin's Scope Calculator. And here you just type in the MOA or mils that you have on your turret and how far you need to move it and at what range. For example, here's the first shot with the EOTech BDC. It needs to come left 2 inches and up 2 inches. So that's 16 clicks. Okay, so once we have a hit in the target zone, we're good enough for a rough zero. So now we need to walk it back to our base zero. Okay, so now that we know that we're on paper at 25, we'll move back to our base zero distance. And what distance would that be? Well, I know a lot of guys zero for 36 yards or 50 yards, and those work great as long as your world is within a shooting bay, or you're shooting out to maybe 200 yards at full-size IPSC silhouettes. One of the problems with close range zeros like the 36 and the 50 is that you really don't see errors in alignment at close distance. You have to push it out a little bit further in order to see that, to get a more precise zero. That's why no matter what rifle or optic combo I'm using, I always set my base zero at 100 yards. So from 100 yards, our zeroing procedure is exactly the same as the 25, except our turrets now match the distance. So if it's 0.5 MOA, it's going to move it half an inch at 100 yards. Also, if you're shooting with a red dot, I recommend dialing down the intensity to the lowest you can, so you get as precise a dot as you can without blooming. Now, if you have a magnifier, I recommend using it, especially 100 yards, even though you don't run a magnifier most of the time. And also, as a reminder, since we're shooting 100 yards, it's time to break out the good ammo, the 69s, 75s, 77s, or whatever you got, because you want the most precision that you can from this distance. Our goal is to start landing shots within the center bullseye. For me, generally, once I start landing 2 shots within the bullseye, that means that I can start grouping. Speaking of grouping, here's a little pop quiz for you. What is the right number of shots to determine the center of a good group? 3, 5, 10, or 30? Well, it turns out Hornady did some testing on this, and so did Brian Nelson, who does a ton of competition and also does instruction for the Marine Corps. And their answer is, in order to have a valid center of a group, you need to fire a minimum of 10 rounds, with the optimum number being 30 rounds. I know what you're thinking. You're saying, dude, 30 rounds is a lot of ammo for zeroing. I agree with you. To tell you the truth, I did not shoot a 30-round group just to compare, but I did do 3, 5, 7, and 10. And for sure, with 10 being the most accurate center for the group. So in reality, the way it works out is once you start landing rounds in the center, I shoot my first group of 10. And once I have that first group of 10, oh, okay, now I know exactly where the center of that group is. I just measure how far it's gonna be until the bullseye, and I move those clicks, and I fire the second group of 10. And now my rifle is zeroed. And since we're zeroed down at 100 yards, one thing you want to do, especially for that rifle that shoots dual ammo, the 55s and the good stuff, is you want to shoot the 55s to see what the point of impact is at 100 yards, because it's going to be different than with the good stuff. It's usually been around 1 to 2 inches off. In my experience, like if you have a target for out 200 yards, I'll use the cheap stuff, and beyond that, I'll use the good stuff. Okay, so now you're zeroed at 100 yards, which actually is a very good zero. No matter what range you're shooting at, outside of 100 yards, which is dead on, your point of impact is always low, so you know you need to come up. So this zero will work for like 87% of shooters out there and your shooting needs. But as my dad would say, why you get B, no A? So I'm gonna take the extra step and fine tune the zero a little bit more based upon the optics use. So first of all, for red dots, I think of these optics as point and shoot. So at close ranges, when you're moving fast and shooting quickly, you don't have the time to think about ballistics. You only need to worry about height over bore. Therefore, for these optics, the zero that I like to use for these is the point blank zero. For some people, they call it the MPBR zero. And the point blank zero is I want to find a zero range where I just point the rifle, hold it dead on, and my point of impact will land within a certain designated diameter. And what diameter should you choose? In my opinion, I think for a red dot, which you can shoot out to 200 yards, I think a USPSA size head box, which measures approximately 6 inches top to bottom, is the right size. In fact, I like to be a little bit more precise. I'll choose a 4-inch diameter, so I have a little bit of room on the top and bottom for air. So with that known, we'll go back to our ballistic calculators because they have the ability to calculate for us a point blank zero range. So we're back in chair gun, and both Strelic and chair gun call it the MRD, most recommended distance calculator. Here you'll see a vital zone graphic to emphasize what you're trying to do with this screen. And there's only one editable value on the screen, and that's the radius. So remember, that's half the diameter. So if you're trying to hit a 4-inch vital zone, enter 2 for this value and click calculate. Now, the first field is the recommended zero distance, so that will be your final zero distance. The second value below it will tell you the furthest distance your hits will stay inside that vital zone. Okay, so since we're at 100 yards for our base zero, how do we get to the final zero? That's what the trajectory height field is used for. So you can either read 0 at that height, i.e. 0 1.9 inches high at 100 yards, or just do the math in your head since it's MOA. So 1.9 inches high is almost 2 inches high, and since the Mepro has 0.5 MOA per click, you need to come up 4 clicks. You can also look in the ballistics table, as that will tell you the exact MOA or mil that you need to come up to match what the MRD is recommending. Now, if you switch over to the LPVO with piggyback setup and check the MRD for the holosun, you're going to get a bigger number. This is due to the higher height over bore. So the more height you have, the further out the MRD will be. Just follow the same procedure. Read 0 for the trajectory height or make the desired clicks up. Just remember that the holosun is 1 MOA per click, so you won't get it dead on. So we have a final 0 for our red dots. What about our EOTech BDC and our LPVO? So for anything with hashes or holds, instead of using point blank, I prefer to bias towards making the drops useful and easy to remember. So once you switch over to those rifles, you go to the reticle view and look at the first couple drops. Are they relatively close to what you can remember and use? For me, I like them to be in 50 to 100 yard increments as they're a little easier to remember. So for the Vortex PST MOA reticle, those drops are okay, but let's see if we can find a better one. First thing I like to do is turn on the near and far 0 setting under the gear. And then from there, if you notice at the top, you have this little turret, which matches the adjustment clicks you set up under the scope setup menu. If I start to turn it and I come up 1 click or 0.5 MOA, you'll notice that the drops get a lot closer to 300, 400, and 500 yards. Those are really good common distances. So I'll just come up 1 click on my turret, and now my new final 0 is 150 yards. So we'll do the same for the EOTech 3-4 BDC model. Make sure the adjustment clicks are correct as there are 0.5 MOA between clicks. Once you've done that and you are in reticle view, see which drops make sense to you. For this rifle, it looks like going up 2 MOA or 4 clicks for a final 0 of 221 yards makes the most sense. So I'll go ahead and make that change. So we're finished with the final zeroing part. That is our final 0 range. As I noted before, you don't have to do this. You can stay at the base 0 if you want, because 100 yard 0 is actually a very good 0. But I think given what these zeros give to us as far as flexibility, I think it's worth the fine tuning. All right, fellas, so whether or not we chose to do the final 0 portion or not, or whether we chose to just stay at the base 0, 100 yards, the final step is always confirming your 0. We should always do it. And what you're doing with confirming the 0 is you're shooting live fire and confirming the results with what the ballistic calculator is telling us. So for this confirmation, you can do it with paper or steel. If you choose paper, then you basically have to walk back various distances based on your holds and shoot a group and just make sure the group is landing where you think it is according to your hold. For expediency, I'm just going to do it using silhouette steel. First up, for our red dots that don't have any holds, no BDCs, we're kind of just limited to anything within 300 yards or so. Even 300 is kind of hard to hit just because you're kind of holding up in space. Because we're using a point blank 0, that means that all the shots should land within a 4-inch diameter. And to verify that, we'll shoot some really small steel that's hung out between 100 and 200 yards. So we'll do that now. So 100 yards should be dead on. A little bit high. 150 dead on. 200, so probably slightly high. There we go. Dead on 100. Dead on 150. 200. Try to hold left. So as you saw, we had no issues hitting that very small steel just by holding dead on. So we don't even need a hold for any of those. The only issue we had was with windage. It was really windy that day. Just remember, we're shooting cheap stuff 55s and they tend to blow in the wind. Now to confirm our long range with our LPVO and EOTech BDC, we'll be shooting small C-zone size silhouettes, which are 12 by 20, I think, from 200 to 600 yards. So 200 should be dead on, first stop. So that one's 300, so 8 inches of drop, should be right on the top of the head. Yep. So that's 400 yards, so that's the first dot. We got a little bit of wind, stay to the target. This third dot should be 500. We'll hold left edge, maybe a little bit more wind, I don't know. There we go, hit. And that's 585, so I don't really know where that is. Probably between this dot and this dot. Just hold a little bit left. Head on. One nut there. As it's on. Ash. Third hash down, 500. We'll hold quite a bit left. Two targets over, 36 inches. All right, fellas, to finally close this out, thanks for sticking with me on this long video. I know there's a lot of information there. I'll leave timestamps in the description so you can quickly jump through the various chapters. So one of the closing thoughts I'll leave you with is you can actually use this zeroing process even for optics you don't own yet. For example, once you set it up in a ballistic calculator, you can sit there and select different reticles. For example, I'm looking for an ACOG. They make a ton of reticles. Say, hey, I want to find the ACOG that's going to work best for my 16-inch rifle shooting 69 grain ammo. And now you have all the information in there. Choose the different ACOG reticles and go, oh, wait a minute. It doesn't really work well with these when I look at the holds, but one of them works a little bit better. And lastly, this video has primarily been for LPVOs and red dots just because those are built for fast action, fast shooting environments where you're doing a lot of 1x shooting and you need to spin up or zoom in or flip in, whatever, for your long range needs, and you need to use the reticle for your holds because that's faster. However, using an MPVO or other high power precision rifle scope, chances are you're probably not going to use the reticle for quick shooting. You're probably going to be dialing in your elevation. And if that's the case, you're probably better off just staying with the base zero of 100 yards because the math is just a little bit easier when you're looking at your charts and you have the time to dial. All right, fellas, that's it for me. Thanks for sticking around. I appreciate it. So I'll leave all the links in the descriptions and the pinned comment in case you're interested in any of the gear. Leave me any questions that you have in the comments. I'll do my best to respond. Thanks again. Well, hopefully we'll see you guys again next time.